What's the price of humiliation? For one man, it was a steak dinner. For his ex-wife, it was the cost of every single meal in a five-star restaurant. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about a woman left with nothing who rebuilt an empire in silence. It's about a man so blinded by his own arrogance, he couldn't see the titan standing right in front of him. He told her she couldn't afford her meal. So, in an act that silenced an entire room and shattered a man's ego, she bought the entire restaurant for the night. Catherine Pierce traced the rim of her water glass, the condensation a cool, grounding sensation against her fingertips. Outside the panoramic window of her corner office, the Seattle skyline glittered a sprawling kingdom of glass and steel under a bruised twilight sky. This view, 28 floors up, had cost her everything she was, and in return had given her everything she had ever wanted. It was her sanctuary, the physical manifestation of a victory no one else knew she had won. 3 years. It had been 3 years, 2 months and 11 days since she had last seen Jonathan Caldwell, the man who had meticulously and methodically dismantled her life piece by piece, convinced he was doing her a favor. He had called her his beautiful, unambitious project, a lovely decorative object that was becoming too expensive to maintain. Their ending hadn't been a dramatic explosion, but a slow, corrosive burn. Jonathan, a senior analyst at a prestigious venture capital firm, worshipped at the altar of financial growth. His world was quantified in market caps, quarterly earnings, and the polished gleam of a new German sedan. Catherine, on the other hand, had found her passion in quieter things. She was a coder, a developer, but her projects weren't the disruptive tech bro fantasies Jonathan chased. She was building an idea, a platform she called Terraverde, designed to connect consumers with verifiably sustainable and ethical businesses. Jonathan had scoffed. A charity project, Kate. People want cheap and fast, not artisanal kale and guilt-free coffee mugs. There's no money in saving the planet. The money is in selling them, the planet, packaged and branded. His words, meant to be pragmatic, were tiny, sharp cuts. He saw her passion as a liability. When his promotion to vice president loomed, the pressure intensified. He started bringing home colleagues, men with sharp suits and predatory smiles. Catherine, in her comfortable jeans and with code snippets still swirling in her head, felt like a foreign object in her own home. The final conversation had happened in their sterile white kitchen, a space designed by an architect Jonathan admired. "It's not working, Kate," he'd said, not looking at her, instead straightening a set of ludicrously expensive Japanese knives in their magnetic block. "What's not working? The Wi-Fi I can rebo us." He cut in his voice, flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used for a bad investment. "I'm looking at my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. You're a rounding error. I need a partner who elevates my profile, who understands the game." Brittany does. Brittany, the sleek blonde marketing executive from his office. A woman who spoke in buzzwords and whose laughter sounded like tiny jingling bells of condescension. Catherine had felt the floor drop out. "You're leaving me for a 5-year plan." He finally turned to her, and his eyes held a look of profound, pitying disappointment. "I'm not just leaving you, I'm setting you free. You can go run your little computer club without having to worry about keeping up appearances." He gestured around the multi-million-dollar condo. "This isn't your world, Kate. You were never comfortable here. You'll be happier." The divorce was swift and brutal. His lawyers were sharks. They argued she had contributed nothing of monetary value to the marriage. Her work on Terraverde was dismissed as a hobby. She walked away with a pittance, her personal belongings, and a single conceded asset, her small art collection. Jonathan had laughed at it. "Take your sad little paintings. Maybe you can sell one to buy groceries." She had crashed on her friend Chloe's couch for 6 months, the shame a physical weight. Every night she'd stare at the ceiling, Jonathan's words echoing in her mind. "You'll never make it without me. You don't have the instinct for survival. But as the weeks turned into months, shame curdled into fuel. She poured every waking hour into Terra Verde. She lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, her world shrinking to the glowing screen of her laptop. She took on freelance coding gigs to pay for server space, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a desperate, furious energy. And then the breakthrough. It came from the very thing he'd mocked. One of the sad little paintings was an early work by an obscure artist named Lena Petrova, whom Catherine had believed in. A documentary on a streaming service suddenly thrust Petrova into the international spotlight, and the value of her early works skyrocketed. Catherine's sad little painting sold at auction for nearly $500,000. It was the seed money she needed. It was poetic karmic justice. She didn't buy a fancy car or a new wardrobe. She hired two of the best developers she knew, rented a tiny office, and poured every cent into making Terra Verde not just functional, but flawless. The app launched quietly 6 months later. For a month it was crickets. Then a popular eco-influencer discovered it. Her post went viral. The story of a platform that cut through corporate greenwashing resonated. Downloads surged. Businesses, big and small, clamored to be vetted for inclusion. Within a year, Terra Verde was the gold standard. Within 2, it was a tech unicorn valued at over $1 billion. And Catherine Pierce, its anonymous founder and CEO, was one of the most powerful new players in the industry. She kept her profile low, using a pseudonym for most public-facing communications. She hadn't wanted the fame. She'd wanted the success. She wanted to build the thing he said was worthless into an empire he couldn't even fathom. Tonight was a celebration. Terra Verde had just closed a landmark deal, acquiring its largest competitor. It was a monumental achievement. Chloe had insisted she go out. Go somewhere expensive and absurd, she'd urged. Go to Aria Ristorante, order the truffle pasta, and laugh at how you used to count pennies for ramen. So here she was, alone in a simple but elegant black dress, ready to have that truffle pasta. She wasn't looking for ghosts. She had long since buried them. But she had forgotten that in a city, even one as large as Seattle, ghosts have a way of finding you. Aria Ristorante was everything it promised to be, an exercise in opulent restraint. Low, warm lighting glinted off polished mahogany and crystal glasses. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and the boisterous laughter of the newly minted. A soft, live piano melody trickled through the restaurant, a gentle counterpoint to the clinking of silver on porcelain. Catherine felt a genuine smile touch her lips for the first time that evening. Chloe was right. This was nice. A world away from the takeout containers and board meetings that had consumed her life. She had ordered a glass of Barolo and was studying the menu, savoring the feeling of unapologetic indulgence, when a familiar grating laugh cut through the sophisticated ambience. Her blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Not here. Not tonight. She slowly, reluctantly lifted her head. And there he was, Jonathan Caldwell, holding court at a prime table near the center of the room. He was heavier now, a prosperous paunch straining against the buttons of his tailored shirt. His hair was thinner, but he compensated with an air of unshakable self-importance. And clinging to his arm, looking like a high-fashion mannequin, was Brittany. Catherine's first instinct was to shrink, to become invisible, to ask for the check and flee. The old shame, the feeling of being judged and found wanting, washed over her in a sickening wave. She could feel his voice in her head again. "This isn't your world, Kate." But then something shifted. She wasn't the woman who had cried on her friend's couch anymore. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She owned the building her office was in. This was her world now. She paid for it. She built it. With a deep breath, she straightened her spine, took a deliberate sip of her wine, and turned her attention back to the menu. She would not be chased out. Fate, however, had other plans. Jonathan, gesturing expansively, while telling some doubtlessly self-aggrandizing story, caught her eye. For a fleeting moment, confusion flickered across his face. He squinted as if trying to place a vaguely familiar servant. Then, recognition dawned, followed by an expression of utter comical disbelief. He nudged Brittany, murmuring something in her ear. Brittany's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose as she glanced over her gaze, sweeping over Catherine's simple dress with dismissive speed before landing on her face. A slow, smug smirk spread across her lips. Catherine's stomach twisted. She knew what was coming. She braced herself. With a sigh that communicated he was about to perform a tedious act of charity, Jonathan excused himself and began to weave his way through the tables toward her. Each step he took felt like a drumbeat of doom. "Well, well, Catherine," he said, his voice a low, condescending boom that was just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. This place is a little steep." He didn't greet her. He didn't ask how she was. He opened with an insult wrapped in feigned concern. The old Jonathan was alive and well. Catherine offered a cool, polite smile. "Jonathan, it's been a while." "It has," he agreed, his eyes roaming her table, noting she was alone. Celebrating something special. A new freelance gig, perhaps. The jab was obvious. He remembered her frantic, desperate hunt for freelance work just to stay afloat. You could say that she replied, her voice even. He leaned in conspiratorially, his cologne, the same overbearing, expensive scent she used to hate washing over her. "Listen, Kate, I'm glad you're treating yourself. I really am. But a word of advice from a friend," he said, using a term that was a lie on every level. "Don't get in over your head. The tasting menu here can run you close to a month's rent on whatever little place you've found. I'd hate for you to have an embarrassing situation when the check comes." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it stole her breath. He genuinely believed she was a charity case, a mouse who had accidentally wandered into the lion's den. The patrons at the next table, a well-dressed older couple, were now openly listening, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Catherine felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, not of shame, but of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, sharp anger she hadn't felt in years. All the pain, all the humiliation, all his dismissive, cutting remarks from their past coalesced into a single blinding moment of clarity. "Thank you for your concern, Jonathan," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "But I think I can handle it." He chuckled, a self-satisfied rumbling sound. Famous last words. "Look, if you get into a jam, just don't look my way. Brittany is trying to impress some clients of hers over there, and a scene would be terribly gauche." He gestured vaguely toward his table, where Brittany was now watching them, with a look of bored superiority. He patted her on the shoulder, a gesture of patronizing finality. "Good to see you, Kate. Really. Try the bread. It's free." As he turned and walked back to his table, the smirk on his face was one of triumph. He had put the little woman back in her place. He sat down, and Catherine could see him recounting the conversation to Brittany, who let out that tinkling, cruel laugh. Catherine sat there motionless. The delicious Barolo now tasted like ash in her mouth. The beautiful restaurant felt like a Kashwitz. He hadn't just insulted her. He had tried to publicly humiliate her, to reinforce the narrative that she was nothing without him. He had assumed with all the confidence of a king that she was poor, struggling, and foolish. He thought she couldn't afford her dinner. An idea, wild and audacious, sparked in her mind. It was insane. It was theatrical. It was exactly the kind of move he would never in a million years anticipate. He thought she couldn't afford dinner. Fine. She would buy him his, and everyone else's too. The rage that had flared in Catherine's chest didn't dissipate. Instead, it cooled, hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. Revenge, she had always thought, was a petty and corrosive pursuit. She had focused on success, on building a better life, believing that was the ultimate victory. But sitting there under the weight of Jonathan's casual cruelty, she realized that some wounds don't heal with silent success. Some wounds needed to be cauterized publicly and decisively. This wasn't just about Jonathan anymore. It was about the woman he had tried to break. It was for the Catherine who ate ramen and coded until her eyes burned, for the Catherine who had been told her dreams were a rounding error. This single grand gesture wouldn't be for him to see her wealth. It would be for her to reclaim her own story right here in the arena he had chosen. She watched him for a moment. He was laughing, holding up his wine glass in a toast. He felt powerful. He felt generous for having deigned to speak to her. The thought made her stomach clench. With newfound purpose, she subtly flagged down a passing waiter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and steady. "I need to speak with the restaurant manager. In private, if possible." The waiter, a young man with attentive eyes, saw the seriousness in her expression and nodded. "Of course, madam. Right this way." He led her away from the main dining room toward a small, elegantly appointed office just off the kitchen. A distinguished man in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an impeccably tailored suit, stood up from behind a large oak desk. His nameplate read, "Mr. Giordano, General Manager." "Good evening, madam. How can I help you? Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, his voice smooth and professional. Catherine closed the door behind her, granting them privacy. "Mr. Giordano, my evening has just become rather interesting. I have an unusual request." He gestured to a chair. "Please, at Aria we pride ourselves on accommodating the unusual." Catherine sat her hands clasped in her lap to still their trembling. "I want to pay for everyone's bill tonight. Every single table." Mr. Giordano's polite smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened with surprise. He had clearly heard requests for paying for a friend's table, or perhaps a special occasion group. But the entire restaurant? This was new. The entire restaurant, madame. He clarified his tone careful. "We are fully booked. That would be a substantial sum." "I'm aware," Catherine said calmly. "I would like you to calculate the total for every open check in the dining room right now. Food, drinks, everything. And then I would like you to add a 40% gratuity for your entire staff, from the chefs to the busboys. They are working hard and they deserve it." Now, for the first time, Mr. Giordano looked genuinely stunned. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. He saw no signs of mania or drunkenness. He saw a woman in a simple dress, with an aura of absolute seriousness. "May I ask the reason for this extraordinary act of generosity?" he inquired, his curiosity piqued. Catherine allowed herself a small wry smile. "Let's just say an old acquaintance reminded me of the importance of generosity. He was concerned I couldn't afford my own meal." She glanced through the small window in the door, her eyes finding Jonathan's table. Specifically, the gentleman at table 12. "I want to ensure his bill is most definitely covered." Mr. Giordano followed her gaze. He recognized Jonathan Caldwell, a regular, known for being a demanding customer and a mediocre tipper. A flicker of understanding and perhaps even amusement crossed the manager's face. The story was beginning to piece itself together in his mind. "I see," he said, a new warmth in his voice. "This is a fascinating request, Ms. Pierce," she supplied. "Catherine Pierce." She slid her card across the desk. It was the Terra Verde executive account. A sleek, black metal card with no spending limit. Mr. Giordano picked it up, his professional training keeping his expression neutral, but his eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he read the name. Catherine Pierce, Terra Verde. He was an astute businessman. He read the financial news. He knew exactly who she was, even if the public didn't. The anonymous, brilliant founder who had appeared out of nowhere. The story suddenly escalated from a personal drama to something legendary. He looked at her with newfound respect. "Ms. Pierce, it would be my absolute honor to facilitate this." He turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He summoned a senior waiter to bring him the physical check slips from every station to ensure accuracy. The office was silent for several minutes, broken only by the clacking of keys and the quiet rustle of paper. Catherine sat perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. Finally, Mr. Giordano turned back to her, a slip of paper in his hand. He looked at the number, then back at her, as if to give her one last chance to back out. The total, Ms. Pierce, including the 40% staff gratuity, comes to $27,481.59. Catherine didn't even blink. She just nodded. That's fine. Please run the card. He did. The machine whirred and beeped, spitting out a receipt. He handed it to her with a pen. As she signed her name, a signature now worth billions, he leaned forward slightly. How would you like this to be announced, Ms. Pierce? We can be discreet, simply informing each table as they request their check. Catherine thought for a moment. Discretion was for another time. This was a statement. No, she said, her voice firm. I want you to make an announcement. To everyone. I want you to say that an anonymous benefactor wishes for everyone to enjoy their evening and that all their expenses have been taken care of. And the gentleman at table 12, Mr. Giordano, asked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. After the main announcement, Catherine said, I would like you personally to go to his table. Please present him with a bill for $0 and inform him that his ex-wife, Catherine Pierce, was especially keen to ensure he was well taken care of tonight, as she was worried he might have an embarrassing situation when the check came. She used his exact words, the petty, condescending phrase now weaponized and aimed right back at his ego. Mr. Giordano's eyes lit up. This was better than theatre. Madam, he said, with a slight bow of his head, the execution will be flawless. Catherine returned to her table, her movements calm and measured, a stark contrast to the thunderous beating of her heart. She felt a strange, heady mix of terror and exhilaration. She picked up her wineglass, her hand steady, and took a sip. From across the room, she could feel Jonathan's gaze on her. He likely assumed she had been complaining to the manager, perhaps trying to get a free dessert for some imagined slight. His expression was one of smug pity. He had no idea the tidal wave that was about to crash down upon his perfectly curated evening. A few minutes later, Mr. Giordano stepped into the center of the dining room. He stood with a relaxed posture, but his presence commanded attention. He tapped a small glass with a spoon, producing a clear, ringing chime that cut through the chatter. A hush fell over Area Ristorante. Diners looked up from their conversations' forks, frozen midway to their mouths. A restaurant-wide announcement was highly unusual. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for just a moment? Mr. Giordano's voice was warm and resonant, filling the space. Area Ristorante, thanks you for your patronage this evening. We have a small but rather unique announcement. He paused for dramatic effect. Catherine's eyes were locked on Jonathan. He was looking at the manager with an annoyed expression, as if his important conversation had been rudely interrupted. Tonight, Mr. Giordano continued, a smile in his voice. A fellow diner who wishes to remain anonymous has extended an extraordinary gesture of generosity. In the spirit of celebrating a personal victory, this benefactor has requested the privilege of paying for every single meal in the restaurant tonight. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of confused murmuring. People looked at each other, then at the manager, then back at each other. Was this a joke? A promotion, to be clear. Mr. Giordano said, his voice rising slightly to be heard over the buzz. Your entire bill, from the appetizers to the vintage wines, has been settled in full. There is no check to be signed, no card to be run. Furthermore, a generous gratuity has been left for the entire staff. Your evening is completely taken care of. The confusion erupted into stunned delight. A table of young tech workers whooped with joy. An elderly couple celebrating their anniversary looked at each other with teary, astonished eyes. Laughter and applause began to ripple through the room. It was a moment of pure, unexpected magic. Catherine watched the scene, a small, secret smile on her face. but her focus was singular. Jonathan. His face was a mask of utter bewilderment. He was looking around trying to spot the anonymous benefactor. He likely assumed it was some billionaire titan of industry, perhaps the man at the table next to him, a known shipping magnate. The idea that this gesture could have anything to do with him or the woman he'd just insulted was so far outside his realm of possibility, it didn't even register. Brittany was equally stunned, her eyes wide as she whispered frantically to Jonathan, "Who would do that? Is it a celebrity?" And then came the masterstroke. As the applause began to die down, Mr. Giordano began to walk, not back to his office, but directly toward table 12. He moved with the grace of a panther, a single folded bill receipt held delicately between his fingers. Jonathan saw him coming and straightened up, a flicker of understanding, the wrong understanding in his eyes. He thought the manager was coming to tell him, a valued regular, who the secret benefactor was. He prepared his face to look impressed. Mr. Giordano stopped beside their table. The patrons nearby, sensing a second act to the play, fell silent again, watching intently. Mr. Caldwell, the manager, said, his voice polite but carrying an edge of steel. "A special message for you." He placed the receipt on the table. It showed the itemized list of their expensive meal, the lobster, thermidor, the wagyu steak, the vintage champagne. And at the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "Total $0, paid in full." Jonathan stared at it, confused. "Yes," you announced. "Someone paid for everyone." "Indeed, Mr. Giordano said, leaning in just enough for the surrounding tables to hear clearly. The anonymous benefactor made only one specific request. "She wanted me to personally deliver your receipt and to pass on a message." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "She wanted me to inform you that your ex-wife, Ms. Catherine Pierce, was especially keen to ensure you were well taken care of tonight." The name hit Jonathan like a physical blow. His jaw went slack. His face, which had been flushed with wine and self-satisfaction, drained of all color, leaving a pasty grey pallor. His eyes darted wildly from the manager's face to Catherine's table across the room. She was watching him. She met his gaze, her expression perfectly neutral, and gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a nod of dismissal. Mr. Giordano delivered the final, crushing line. "Ms. Pierce was apparently concerned you might have an embarrassing situation when the check came. She hopes you enjoyed your dinner." A wave of snickers and sharp intakes of breath rippled through the nearby tables. The older couple, who had overheard Jonathan's initial condescension, now stared at him with open contempt. The story was complete. They had witnessed the setup and now the devastating punchline. Brittany looked back and forth between Jonathan's horrified face and Catherine, a dawning, horrified comprehension on her own. The woman her partner had just mocked and pitied as a penniless loser had just bought out one of the most expensive restaurants in Seattle for an entire evening. The social humiliation was absolute. Jonathan looked as though he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a man who lived and died by status, by appearances. And in one fell swoop, Catherine had stripped him of all of it in front of his new partner, his clients, and a room full of his peers. She hadn't just proven him wrong, she had used his own arrogance as a weapon and annihilated him with it. The restaurant remained a theatre of Jonathan's humiliation. The initial buzz of excitement from the other diners had been replaced by a more focused, intense curiosity directed at table 12. Whispers were no longer about the free meal, but about the spectacular takedown they had just witnessed. "Did you hear? It was his ex-wife. He told her she couldn't afford it." The story spread through the room like wildfire. Jonathan sat paralyzed, his face a grotesque marble statue of shock. The receipt on the table felt like a death warrant for his ego. Brittany was fuming, her face tight with a fury born of pure social embarrassment. This was not the impressive power player evening she had envisioned. She was now part of a cautionary tale being whispered over dessert. For Catherine, the moment was surreal. The anger had subsided, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. She had done it. She had faced the ghost of her past and vanquished it. With a quiet grace, she placed her napkin on the table, stood up, and prepared to leave. She had no desire to gloat or to engage further. The act itself was the entire conversation. But Jonathan, jolted from his stupor by the sight of her leaving, finally found his voice and his legs. He scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair. "Kate." "Wait," he called out, his voice hoarse. He rushed toward her, intercepting her near the exit. His face was a desperate, pleading mess. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, frantic panic. "What was that?" he hissed, his voice low and trembling. "What kind of sick game is this? Where did you get that kind of money?" Catherine looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt nothing but a distant pity. He was so small, so utterly consumed by the one thing she no longer cared about. "It's not a game, Jonathan," she said, her voice cool and steady. "It's just my life now. Your life." "What life?" he sputtered. "The last I heard, you were selling paintings to make rent. How do you go from that to this?" He gestured wildly at the room of diners who were now enjoying a meal on her dime. This was the moment, the final piece of the puzzle she had kept hidden for 3 years, the ultimate twist that would reframe his entire understanding of the world he thought he dominated. "You were right about one thing, Jonathan," she began, her tone conversational. "There was no money in my little charity project, at least not at first. It took work. It took investment. The painting you so kindly let me keep was a good start." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of memory. "That thing, that couldn't have paid for all this?" "No, it didn't," she agreed. "It paid for the servers, the first 2 developers, and an office the size of a closet. The rest—" She paused, letting the suspense build. "The rest came from the profits." He stared at her blankly. "Profits? What profits? What are you even doing?" Catherine allowed a small, genuine smile. It wasn't triumphant, but it was deeply satisfied. "I built the thing you said was impossible. My little computer club, as you called it." She looked him directly in the eye and delivered the final blow. "My name is Catherine Pierce, and I am the founder and CEO of Terra Verde." If the announcement about paying for the restaurant had been a lightning strike, this was the earthquake that followed, cracking the very foundations of Jonathan's world. His jaw didn't just drop, it seemed to unhinge. The blood drained so completely from his face that for a moment, Catherine worried he might actually faint. "Terra Verde," he whispered the name, tasting like poison on his tongue. "No, no, that's impossible. The founder is anonymous. They use a pseudonym." "A necessary precaution at first," Catherine said. "I didn't want the distraction." Jonathan stumbled back a step, his mind reeling frantically, trying to connect the dots. Terra Verde wasn't just some successful app. It was a phenomenon. It was the white whale his venture capital firm, Northgate Capital, had been hunting for months. They were desperate to get in on the next round of funding. It was the deal that Jonathan's own boss, Mr. Peterson, had personally tasked him with. His entire career trajectory, his upcoming annual bonus, his very reputation at the firm was tied to securing a meeting with the mythical, untouchable founder of Terra Verde. And he had just spent the evening telling her she couldn't afford bread. The Northgate pitch. He stammered, his eyes wide with horror. "The proposal for the Series C funding round. I've been sending emails for 6 weeks. To an address. An address for the founder's office. I know," Catherine said quietly. "I've been reading them. They're very persistent." The full catastrophic scale of his miscalculation crashed down on him. He hadn't just insulted his ex-wife. He had insulted the single most important business contact of his entire career. He had called her a failure to her face, while simultaneously begging her through anonymous emails to make him rich. The irony was so potent, so devastating, it was almost poetic. He looked at her, at the woman in the simple black dress he had dismissed as a rounding error, and he finally saw her. He saw the power, the intelligence, the sheer indomitable will he had been too blind and arrogant to ever recognize. And in that moment, he knew he was ruined. The revelation hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Jonathan stared at Catherine, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret. The architect of his potential salvation and the architect of his public humiliation were the same person. He had flown too close to the sun, and the sun had turned out to be the woman he'd thrown away. Kate. Catherine, I didn't know, he stammered, taking a clumsy step toward her, his hands outstretched in a desperate, pleading gesture. My God, if I had known, if you had known what Jonathan. Catherine asked, her voice cutting through his panic like ice, that I was successful, that I had money. Would you have been kinder? Would you have treated me like a human being instead of a piece of dirt on your shoe? Yes, of course. No, this is a misunderstanding, he babbled, his usual slick composure completely shattered. He was a drowning man, and the water was of his own making. From across the restaurant, Brittany, having seen the colour drain from Jonathan's face and the raw panic in his eyes, finally decided to intervene. She marched over her heels, clicking angrily on the polished floor. What is going on? She demanded, directing her fury not at Jonathan, but at Catherine. What did you say to him? Catherine simply looked at her, a silent, unimpressed gaze that seemed to take in Brittany's expensive dress, her perfect makeup, and dismiss it all as irrelevant. I was just catching up with my ex-husband, Catherine replied coolly. We were discussing business opportunities. Business, Jonathan croaked, seizing the word like a life raft. Yes, the deal. The Northgate deal. Catherine, we have to talk. My proposal. It's solid. It's the best offer you'll get. We can make billions together, like we should have. The audacity of it was breathtaking. In the span of 30 seconds, he had gone from insulting her to trying to leverage their painful past into a business partnership. Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a sound of mirth, but of disbelief. Together, Jonathan, there is no we, there is no together. You made your choice 3 years ago in our kitchen. You chose a 5-year plan that didn't include me. She turned her gaze to Brittany, who looked confused and angry. And I believe you were a key feature of that plan. How's it working out for you, Brittany? Flushed, speechless. The Northgate proposal is off the table, Catherine stated, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Effective immediately. I will not under any circumstances do business with a man who holds so little respect for others, especially not for me. Jonathan's face crumpled. No, you can't do that. This deal is my life. Peterson will kill me. Catherine, please. He actually reached out to grab her arm. Catherine flinched back, a spark of her old fear mixing with her new strength. Before she could react, Mr. Giordano materialized at her side, his presence calm but immovable. Is there a problem here, Ms. Pierce? He asked, his eyes fixed on Jonathan. Mr. Caldwell was just leaving, Catherine said firmly. No, I'm not leaving, Jonathan insisted, his voice rising to a pathetic whine. We have to talk. The sight was truly pitiful. The once mighty financial analyst, the king of his own small universe, was begging in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. The other diners were now shamelessly watching the drama unfold. It was better than any show in town. So Mr. Giordano said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. I believe Ms. Pierce has made her wishes clear. I suggest you return to your table, or I will have you removed from the premises. The threat of being physically ejected was the final humiliation. Defeated Jonathan, deflated. The fight went out of him, replaced by the hollow emptiness of absolute ruin. He stared at Catherine one last time, his eyes pleading, but he saw no mercy in hers. He saw only closure. He turned and shuffled back to his table, a broken man. Brittany was already gathering her purse, her face a mask of cold fury. Her evening of hobnobbing had turned into a public spectacle of the most mortifying kind. She shot a venomous glare at Catherine before turning her back on Jonathan, leaving him completely alone at the table, surrounded by the ghosts of the feast he hadn't paid for. Catherine gave a grateful nod to Mr. Giordano. "Thank you." "The pleasure was all mine, Miss Pierce," he said, with a genuine smile. "Truly." She walked toward the grand double doors of the exit. As she passed, the elderly couple who had witnessed the entire arc of the evening raised their glasses to her in a silent, respectful toast. The young tech workers gave her a quiet, awestruck round of applause. She hadn't just paid for their dinner, she had delivered a masterclass in justice. Catherine stepped out into the cool, damp Seattle night. The city lights seemed to shine brighter. She took a deep breath, not of the polluted city air, but of the clean, crisp air of freedom. The ghost was gone. The echoes were silenced. The past was finally and completely behind her. The morning after the Aria Ristorante incident, Catherine awoke not to the expected rush of triumphant adrenaline, but to a profound and unnerving quiet. The storm had passed. The ghost she had carried for 3 years had been confronted, exposed, and had dissipated into nothing more than a pathetic memory. In its place was a strange, hollow stillness. She had won decisively and spectacularly, but the silence that followed felt vast and uncharted. It was the silence of a new beginning, and it was in its own way as intimidating as the battle itself. She went through her morning routine, a brisk run along the waterfront, a simple breakfast of avocado toast and black coffee, feeling like a stranger in her own skin. The anger that had fueled her for so long was gone, and she had to relearn how to move without its weight. Miles away, in a glass tower that scraped the sky, Jonathan Caldwell was experiencing a very different kind of morning. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he straightened his tie for the 3rd time. He had received a one-line email at 6 a.m. "My office, 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Peterson." He walked into the plush, imposing office of Robert Peterson, the CEO of Northgate Capital, feeling like a condemned man walking to the gallows. Peterson, a formidable man with a reputation for surgical precision in both his investments and his dismissals, was standing by his window, looking down at the city. He didn't turn around. "Tell me about Terra Verde." "Jonathan Peterson," said his voice, deceptively calm. Jonathan's blood ran cold. "Sir, it's the leading platform in the sustainable tech space. Incredible growth completely cornered the market. It's the company I've been pitching for the Series C funding." "I know what it is," Peterson said, finally turning. His eyes were like chips of ice. "What I want to know is about the founder, the brilliant, anonymous, untouchable founder we've been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months. The founder you assured me you were making significant headway with. I've been persistent, sir. The channels are very guarded." Jonathan began, his voice weak. Peterson held up a hand, silencing him. "I got a call last night, Jonathan, from a friend who was dining at Aria Ristorante. He told me the most incredible story. A story about a mysterious tech CEO paying for the entire restaurant. A story about my vice president of acquisitions publicly humiliating himself. And then, this morning, I got an email from the CEO of Terra Verde herself." He walked over to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. She introduced herself. "Catherine Pierce. Does that name ring a bell?" Jonathan felt the floor dissolve beneath him. "Robert, I can explain. It's a personal matter." A misunderstanding from years ago. A misunderstanding. Peterson's voice was now laced with a cold fury that was far more terrifying than shouting. You were tasked with landing the single biggest deal in this firm's 5-year plan. You found the person who holds the keys to that kingdom, and you told her she couldn't afford her dinner. You didn't just have a misunderstanding, Jonathan. You walked up to the winning lottery ticket, called it a worthless piece of scrap paper, and tried to light it on fire. In public. I didn't know it was her. Jonathan pleaded desperation, cracking his voice. That's the point. Peterson slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent office. Your job is to see value where others don't. Your job is to build relationships, to show respect, to treat the receptionist with the same courtesy as the CEO. Because you never know who is who. Instead, you acted like a petty, arrogant fool. Your personal life has now cost this firm a catastrophic amount of reputational damage and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in future earnings. He leaned back in his leather chair, his face a mask of disappointment. Your conduct was antithetical to the ethos of Northgate Capital. Your personal judgment has proven to be a liability we can no longer afford. He slid a folder across the desk. This is your severance package. It is not generous. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 10 minutes. Jonathan stared at the folder. His career, his identity, his entire 5-year plan, all of it gone. Evaporated in a single night of hubris. He had been dismissed like a rounding error. Catherine, oblivious to the drama unfolding in Jonathan's office, arrived at Terra Verde. The energy was electric. Her acquisition of their main competitor was the talk of the industry, and her team was buzzing with excitement and pride. She led the morning meeting, her voice steady and her vision clear, outlining the next steps for integration. Watching her team, the bright, passionate people who believed in her and her mission, she felt the strange emptiness begin to fill. This was real. This was what she had built. The noise of her past was finally being replaced by the sound of her future. That afternoon, she met Chloe for lunch. Her friend was practically vibrating with vicarious glee. Spill it. Every single detail, Chloe demanded after they ordered. I want to know the look on his face, and hers. Oh, I bet Brittany looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Catherine recounted the story, her tone more analytical than triumphant. When she got to the part about revealing who she was, Chloe slammed her hand on the table. Yes. Oh my God. That's better than a movie. So what's next? Are you going to sue him for emotional distress, buy his company and fire him yourself? His company already fired him, Catherine said quietly. Chloe's jaw dropped. No way. How do you know I don't officially? But I will, Catherine said. She took a sip of her iced tea. Their CEO wants a meeting. Robert Peterson from Northgate, Chloe frowned. To do what, Gravel? You're not actually going to meet with them, are you? After Jonathan? After everything, I am, Catherine said simply. Kate, why? Chloe asked, her voice softening. You don't owe them anything. You won. You can work with any VC firm in the world right now. This isn't about winning anymore, Catherine explained, leaning forward. That part is over. This is about building. Jonathan's proposal, once you strip away all the nonsense, was strategically sound. Northgate has the global infrastructure we need for our next phase of expansion. His personal failure doesn't negate their corporate value. She smiled wryly. He was a terrible husband, but he was on paper a decent analyst. My job now is to make the best decision for my company. And the best decision is to hear them out from a position of absolute power. Chloe stared at her for a long moment, then slowly broke into a wide smile. You're terrifying, you know that. In the best possible way. He tried to ruin your life, and you're turning the wreckage into a business opportunity. That's my girl. Back in her office, the formal email from Robert Peterson was waiting just as she'd predicted. Her assistant Paige stood by, tablet in hand. Catherine read the groveling apology, her expression unreadable. When she reached the line confirming Jonathan's termination, the pang she felt was not for him, but for the ghost of the man she had once loved. The ambitious young man who had somewhere along the way curdled into this bitter, arrogant stranger. It was the final, definitive closing of a book she had been forced to carry for too long. "What are your instructions?" Ms. Pierce Page asked, watching her boss carefully. Catherine turned from the email and looked out at her view. The city wasn't just a landscape anymore. It was a testament. Every building, every street, every light was a reminder that worlds could be built and worlds could be broken by a single decision. Jonathan had made his. Now she was making hers. "Paige," she said, her voice imbued with a new, calm authority, "schedule a video conference with Mr. Peterson for next week. Let his assistant know that my time is limited, so he should be concise." "And the tone?" Paige asked, sensing the importance of this detail. "The tone is that we are a global enterprise, exploring all our options," Catherine said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "He is not apologizing for a social faux pas. He is making a business pitch to me because his firm is now at a distinct disadvantage. Make sure he understands that." "And Paige." "Yes, Ms. Pierce. When you send the confirmation, make sure you sign it from the office of Catherine Pierce. No more anonymity. The ghost is gone." Paige nodded, a look of profound respect on her face, and left to carry out the orders. Catherine stood alone, the afternoon sun warming her face through the glass. She had paid for dinner to prove a point to a man who didn't matter. But in the process, she had proven to herself that her empire wasn't built on revenge. It was built on resilience, intelligence, and the unwavering belief in her little charity project that was now changing the world. The view from the top was clear, and for the first time she felt she truly deserved it. In the end, Catherine Pierce didn't just pay for dinner. She brought back her own narrative. She reminded a man and a world that a person's worth is not determined by their partner, their income, or the price of their meal. It's forged in silence, in hard work, and in the refusal to be defined by those who try to keep you small. Jonathan's arrogance cost him his dinner, his job, and his future. Catherine's quiet dignity gained her the ultimate prize piece. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Was it perfect justice or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. At the most exclusive charity ball of the year, one man made a fatal mistake. He thought his ex-wife was a ghost from a past he'd successfully buried under a mountain of social media posts and public adoration for his new influencer fiancée. He paraded his new life like a trophy, intending to rub her face in what she'd lost. But he failed to notice the quiet, unassuming man by her side. He didn't realize that while he was busy trying to own the room for a night, her date was about to own the entire building. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story about the deafening silence of true power in a world obsessed with empty noise. Sophia Hayes considered the invitation for the third time. The thick, cream-colored cardstock felt heavy in her hands, its embossed silver lettering shimmering under the warm light of her small, meticulously organized apartment. The annual Phoenix Ball for Children's Aid, the Serafina Grand Hotel. It was the event of the season, a place to see and be seen, a glittering constellation of old money, new tech, and the carefully curated fame of the digital age. It was also the last place on Earth she wanted to be. 2 years ago, a place like the Serafina was her natural habitat. She had navigated these shark-infested waters with a practiced grace, not as Sophia Hayes, but as Mrs. Leo Vance. She had been the silent partner, the steady hand, the behind-the-scenes strategist who had helped build Leo's boutique marketing firm from a 2-person operation in a cramped office into the Vance lifestyle brand. She'd managed the finances, edited the proposals, and smoothed over the egos of clients he'd nearly alienated with his burgeoning arrogance. She had been the foundation upon which he built his shiny, fragile empire. And then came Skylar Monroe. Skylar wasn't just a person. She was a phenomenon, a cascade of professionally lit selfies, Aspirational quotes pasted over stock photos of sunsets and day-in-the-life vlogs that were as authentic as a $3 bill. With 50 million followers hanging on her every sponsored post, she was the human embodiment of the world Leo desperately wanted to conquer. He hadn't just left Sophia for Skylar, he had publicly rebranded his entire life, erasing Sophia's contributions, as if they were a draft of a post he'd decided not to publish. The divorce had been brutal, not financially, but emotionally. Leo had used his marketing savvy to paint a public narrative he was the dynamic innovator held back by a quiet, unambitious wife. Now, with Skylar, he was finally unleashed. Their Instagram was a fire hose of performative happiness, private jets to Monaco, front row seats at Paris Fashion Week, and a nauseatingly detailed account of their whirlwind romance culminating in a beachside proposal captured by a drone. Their hashtag #SkyleoLimit was trending weekly. Sophia, in contrast, had chosen quiet dignity. She took a modest settlement enough to be comfortable, not enough to be idle, and started a small, bespoke business restoring antique books and documents. It was work that required patience, precision, and a love for things with history and substance. It was everything her former life was not. Her joy was now found in the scent of old paper and leather, the delicate process of mending a torn page, the quiet satisfaction of bringing something beautiful back from the brink of decay. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend, Maya. "Don't you dare tell me you've already turned it into a bookmark." Maya's text read, followed by a string of champagne bottle emojis. Sophia smiled faintly. "Still contemplating using it for kindling," she typed back. "No, you are going. I've already seen the posts. Skylar is wearing a custom Valdrin Sahiti gown. She's promised a royal entrance. And you cannot let them have the entire stage. You need to go and just exist. Beautifully. Unbothered. Unbothered. It felt like an impossible state of being. Every time a friend sympathetically mentioned seeing Leo and Skylar in a magazine or on a gossip site, the wound felt fresh. It wasn't that she wanted him back. God, no. It was the sting of being so thoroughly and publicly discarded. She was the inconvenient first chapter they'd ripped out of the book. "I don't have a dress," Sophia replied, a weak excuse. "I'll be over in an hour. We're going shopping. Not for a battle dress. For an I've already won dress," Maya shot back. Later that week, feeling a strange mix of dread and resolve, Sophia found herself in a high-end boutique she would have never entered on her own. Maya was a force of nature, pulling gowns from racks with a determined gleam in her eye. Sophia felt awkward and out of place, a sepia photograph in a technicolor world. "No, not that," Maya would say, dismissing a sequined number. "Too loud. You're not competing with a parrot. You're a swan." Finally, Maya pulled out a dress of deep midnight blue silk. It was deceptively simple, a classic A-line cut, with a modest neckline and a low back. It didn't scream for attention. It didn't have feathers or 1,000 crystals. But when Sophia put it on, it felt like a second skin. It flowed, it whispered. It commanded a quiet, potent elegance. It was the physical embodiment of the woman she was trying to become. "That's the one," Maya said, her voice soft with conviction. "When you walk into that ballroom, you won't be Leo Vance's ex-wife. You'll just be Sophia, and that will be more than enough." Sophia looked at her reflection. She saw the hint of dark circles under her eyes, the lingering sadness in their depths. But she also saw a flicker of something else, a spark of defiance, a woman who had survived the fire and was still standing. Maybe Maya was right. It wasn't about winning a battle with Leo. It was about showing up for herself. She bought the dress. She still wasn't sure if she had a date or if she even wanted one. Going alone felt both terrifying and empowering. But as she walked out of the store, the invitation in her purse no longer felt like a summons to her own execution. It felt like a dare. 3 days before the Phoenix Ball, the universe intervened in the form of a spilled cappuccino. Sophia had sought refuge in her favorite sanctuary, the Gilded Page. a small, independent bookstore and cafe in a quieter part of the city. It smelled of roasted coffee beans and aging paper, a combination she found deeply comforting. She was at a small table in the back, hunched over a fragile 19th century copy of Moby Dick, a recent acquisition for a client. Her tools were laid out with surgical precision, archival tape, powdered eraser, a bone folder. She was so engrossed in her delicate work that she didn't notice the man approaching her table until he was almost upon it. He was tall and dressed in a way that defied easy categorization. He wore a simple grey cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and well-worn leather boots, clothes that suggested quality and comfort, not a desire to impress. His hair was a little unruly, and he had the thoughtful, slightly tired eyes of someone who spent more time thinking than talking. He was trying to navigate the narrow aisle between her table and a shelf of poetry when a college student with a massive backpack swiveled abruptly. The student's bag caught the man's arm, sending the large cappuccino he was holding arcing through the air. Sophia reacted on pure instinct. With a speed that surprised even herself, she swept her arm over her table, shielding the antique book as the hot, milky coffee splattered across her forearm and the wooden surface. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," the student stammered, horrified. "I'm so sorry," the man said simultaneously, his voice a calm, low baritone. He ignored the coffee seeping into his own sweater and immediately focused on her. "Are you all right? Did you get burned?" He grabbed a handful of napkins from a dispenser and with a surprising gentleness began to carefully dab at her arm, his movements efficient and concerned. "I'm fine," Sophia said, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline. "Thank you. The book. Is it okay?" She carefully inspected the volume. It was untouched, safe under the protective sleeve she always used. A wave of relief washed over her. The student, flustered and apologetic, practically fled the scene. The man, however, remained. "Let me buy you another coffee, and perhaps a pastry to compensate for the assault." He offered a small wry smile. "My name is Alexander." "Sophia," she replied, finding herself smiling back. "And you don't have to. It was an accident." "I insist." "Besides," he said, gesturing to the now empty poetry shelf aisle, "you saved me from having to pretend I understood Rilke. You've done me a great service." They ended up sharing a table. He insisted on buying her a new coffee and a croissant, and to her surprise, the conversation flowed effortlessly. He asked about the book, and his interest was genuine. He didn't just nod along. He asked intelligent questions about the binding, the paper, the history of the edition. She found herself explaining the art of restoration with a passion she usually reserved for her work. In return, he spoke about his own work in vague but intriguing terms, mentioning systems architecture and efficiency modeling. He talked about a love for building things that were elegant, durable, and functional from the ground up. He sounded more like a master craftsman than a businessman, and Sophia found it captivating. There was no posturing, no name-dropping, no subtle attempts to gauge her net worth or social standing. He was just interested in her. It's rare to meet someone who creates and preserves things of substance in a world obsessed with the ephemeral. He remarked, his gaze thoughtful, as he looked at her hands, which still had a faint smudge of graphite on them. That one sentence resonated with Sophia more than any compliment she had received in years. He saw her. Not the ex-wife, not the socialite, but the restorer, the preserver of stories. They talked for nearly 2 hours until the afternoon sun began to fade. As they prepared to leave, an idea both bold and terrifying sparked in Sophia's mind. It was Maya's voice in her head urging her on. Exist. Beautifully, unbothered. "This is going to sound incredibly forward," she began, her cheeks flushing slightly. "But I have an invitation to a charity event on Saturday, the Phoenix Ball. I was planning on going alone, but—" She trailed off, suddenly losing her nerve. Alexander didn't miss a beat. His expression didn't change, but a warmth entered his eyes. I would be honored to accompany you, Sophia, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. On one condition. What's that? That you tell me the story of the first book you ever fell in love with. And just like that, she had a date. A kind, intelligent, grounded man who seemed utterly unimpressed by the glitz and glamour the ball represented. As she walked home, a genuine, unforced smile graced her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She had no idea who Alexander really was. She just knew that for the first time she was actually looking forward to the gala. She wasn't going to prove a point to Leo. She was going with a man who appreciated substance in a world of surfaces. The Serafina Grand Hotel was not merely a building, it was a statement. A century-old bastion of opulence. Its marble floors gleamed under the weight of colossal crystal chandeliers, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with wealth and influence. On the night of the Phoenix Ball, this effect was magnified 100-fold. Women in gowns that cost more than cars, dripped with diamonds, and men in bespoke tuxedos conducted business with hushed, confident tones. Sophia felt a familiar pang of anxiety as their car pulled up, but it was different this time. It wasn't the crushing insecurity Leo used to cultivate in her. It was the healthy nervousness of stepping back into a world she had left behind, but on her own terms. Alexander, seated beside her, seemed completely unperturbed. He had arrived at her apartment in a classic, impeccably tailored tuxedo, but his demeanor was the same as it had been in the coffee shop, calm, attentive, and focused entirely on her. "You look breathtaking, Sophia," he said, his voice a quiet anchor in the sea of noise and flashing cameras at the entrance. He helped her from the car, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. Her midnight blue dress, once a source of apprehension, now felt like armor. It didn't shout, but it held its own. As they walked up the grand staircase, a ripple of recognition went through the crowd, but it wasn't for her. Whispers followed them. Heads turned. Sophia initially assumed they were staring at her, the disgraced ex-wife making a surprise appearance. Then she realized all eyes were on Alexander. The city's power brokers, the tech titans, the stern-faced matriarchs of old families, they were all looking at him, some with awe, some with deference, some with undisguised envy. A portly man in a too-tight tuxedo practically tripped over himself to greet them. "Mr. Sterling, what an unexpected honor. We weren't aware you'd be gracing us with your presence tonight." Sterling. The name clicked in Sophia's mind. Not just Alexander Sterling, the founder and CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, the reclusive tech billionaire who had revolutionized data security. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine of modern commerce, famously private and rarely photographed. He was the kind of man Leo Vance pretended to be in his wildest dreams. Sophia felt a dizzying wave of shock. This was the man who had debated the merits of vellum with her over a croissant. He saw the question in her eyes. "We can leave if this is too much," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. "My apologies. I value my privacy. I should have been more forthright." "No," Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. She took a deep breath. "No, it's all right. I'm glad you're here with me." And she meant it. His identity changed the context, but not the man himself. His presence was no longer just comforting. It was a fortress. They had just acquired their champagne when the real show began. The press cameras at the entrance flashed with a renewed frenzy, and a wave of sound washed over the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, arriving now, Mr. Leo Vance and his fiancée, the incredible Skylar Monroe." The event host boomed over the microphone. Leo and Skylar made their entrance not as guests, but as a spectacle. He was preening in a velvet tuxedo, a smug grin plastered on his face. Skylar was a vision in her silver Valdrin Sahiti gown, which seemed to be composed more of light and crystals than fabric. It was a magnificent dress, but on her it felt like a costume. She posed, she pouted, She blew kisses to the cameras that followed her every move, her personal vlogger trailing her like a pilot fish. They held court in the center of the room, air-kissing acquaintances and soaking in the adoration. It was only a matter of time before Leo spotted her. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping over faces, and then they locked on Sophia. His smug smile tightened. He saw her dress, her quiet elegance, and then his eyes landed on the man beside her. He didn't recognize Alexander. To Leo, he was just some anonymous man in a tux, a placeholder. Perfect. This was the narrative he wanted. His ex-wife, trying desperately to keep up, had brought some no-name date to the biggest event of the year. With Skylar in tow, he strode towards them, a predator closing in. Well, well, Leo began, his voice oozing condescension. Sophia, I'm surprised to see you out. I thought you'd be at home with your books. The last word was laced with pity. Hello, Leo, Sophia said, her voice even. Her hand found Alexander's, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. And this must be your +1, Leo said, barely glancing at Alexander before turning his full dismissive attention back to Sophia. I want you to meet my fiancée, Skylar Monroe. He presented her as if unveiling a masterpiece. You've probably seen her work. She's a true force in the digital space. Skylar gave Sophia a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Oh, hi, she cooed, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan of Sophia's dress and simple jewelry. That's a lovely dress. So classic. The unspoken addendum, old boring safe, hung in the air between them. It's so brave of you to come tonight. All of this must be a little overwhelming. The performance was for her vlogger's camera, which was now pointed directly at them, capturing every nuance of the carefully orchestrated humiliation. Sophia refused to take the bait. It's a beautiful event for a worthy cause, she said calmly. It's good to see it so well attended. Leo laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. Always so diplomatic. Some things never change. He then turned to Alexander, finally, deigning to acknowledge him. So, what do you do, pal? Let me guess. Accountant, lawyer? He was trying to place him in a box to categorize and dismiss him. Before Alexander could answer, the event host was back on the microphone. And now we'd like to present this year's Visionary Philanthropist Award to a man who has redefined the landscape of modern lifestyle branding, Mr. Leo Vance. A smattering of polite applause turned more enthusiastic as Leo's supporters cheered. He beamed, squeezed Skylar's hand, and shot a final triumphant look at Sophia. Duty calls, he said. Enjoy the party. From the sidelines. He walked toward the stage, the spotlight following him. Sophia watched him go, the sting of his words sharp and familiar. It was one thing to be discarded, another to be so publicly and cruelly reminded of it. Alexander's hand was still holding hers, a silent, solid presence. She looked up at him and saw that the calm, thoughtful expression on his face had been replaced by something else, a quiet, glacial stillness. He wasn't angry, he was observing, calculating. And in that moment, Sophia had the distinct feeling that Leo Vance had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Leo stood on the stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, feeling invincible. He held the crystal award in his hand, a tangible symbol of his success. Skylar watched him from the front table, her phone held high, recording his moment of glory for her millions of followers. Thank you. Thank you. Leo began, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. They call this the Visionary Award, and it truly takes vision to build something from nothing. It takes drive, it takes passion, and most importantly, it takes having the right partner by your side. Someone who inspires you, who pushes you to be better, who sees the future and runs towards it with you. He paused, locking eyes with Skylar. To my incredible fiancée Skylar, this is as much yours as it is mine. You are my inspiration. The crowd applauded. In the background, Sophia stood motionless. Every word was a carefully crafted erasure of her own history. The late nights, the sacrifices, the belief she had poured into him, all of it deleted. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a profound, hollow sadness. Alexander watched her face. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, the way she held herself perfectly still to keep from shattering. He had seen enough. While Leo continued his speech, boasting about his brand's influence and his unprecedented growth, Alexander discreetly took out his phone. His movements were minimal, almost unnoticeable in the dim light. He typed a short, simple message to a single contact, Robert. Initiate the Serafina acquisition. Use the discretionary fund. I'm on site. Confirm when complete. He put the phone away. That was all. No dramatic pronouncements, no raised voice, just a quiet command sent out into the digital ether. Leo finished his speech to another round of applause and practically floated back to his table, high on his own rhetoric. He caught Sophia's eye again and gave her a pitying smirk. He then turned to the general manager of the Serafina, a man named Mr. Dubois, who had rushed over to congratulate him. Mr. Vance, a spectacular speech, Dubois gushed. Truly, the hotel is honored to host your triumph. Of course, Dubois, Leo said, waving a dismissive hand. It's the premier venue in the city. Where else would I be? We bring a certain prestige, don't we? He leaned in conspiratorially. Make sure my fiancée's champagne glass stays full. On the house, of course, for the publicity. Of course, Mr. Vance. Anything you need. It was this small yet telling exchange that solidified Alexander's decision. It wasn't just the personal insult to Sophia. It was the cheap arrogance, the casual disrespect for the people and the place that served him. Leo didn't see a historic hotel. He saw a backdrop for his Instagram. Alexander gently touched Sophia's arm. Would you care for a walk on the terrace? He asked, his voice low. She nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere. They stepped out into the cool night air. The terrace overlooked the city, a breathtaking panorama of glittering lights. For a few minutes they stood in silence. I'm sorry, Alexander, Sophia said finally. You didn't sign up for all that. I signed up to spend an evening with you, Sophia, he replied, turning to face her. Nothing that happened in there changes that. His words have no power unless you give it to them. Before she could respond, a harried-looking Mr. Dubois burst onto the terrace, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He wasn't looking at Sophia. He was staring at Alexander with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Behind him, a woman in a headset. The event coordinator was whispering frantically into her microphone. Mr. Sterling? Dubois stammered, his sycophantic demeanor toward Leo completely gone, replaced by trembling deference. Forgive me, I just received a call from the ownership group, from your people. Alexander simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. There seems to have been a transaction, Dubois said, his voice barely a whisper. A rather significant one, effective immediately. He swallowed hard. Welcome, sir, to your hotel. Sophia froze. She looked from Dubois's terrified face to Alexander's calm one. The city lights swam before her eyes. Your hotel? Alexander gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Thank you, Mr. Dubois. I trust my ownership will not be a problem. No, sir, not at all. An honor, a supreme honor. Good. Alexander said, his voice still quiet, yet it now carried the weight of absolute authority. First, please extend my compliments to the chef. The meal has been excellent. Second, please inform the bar staff that all drinks for the remainder of the evening are on me. It's a celebration. Yes, Mr. Sterling. At once. And Mr. Dubois? Alexander added, his voice dropping slightly. There is one other thing. Anything, sir. Alexander's eyes flickered for a moment towards the ballroom, where Leo was laughing loudly, holding his award up for another photo. It has come to my attention that one of your guests, a Mr. Vance, believes his presence here grants him special privileges. He seems to be under the impression that he owns the room. A look of pure dread dawned on Dubois' face. I'd like you to correct that misunderstanding for me. Alexander continued, his tone smooth as silk. Discreetly, of course. Please present him with his final bill for the evening. Everything. His table, his guests' meals, the champagne he so generously offered on the house. And please add a 20% gratuity for the staff he has been treating so poorly. My staff? Dubois looked as if he might faint. Right away, Mr. Sterling. Right away. He practically ran from the terrace. Sophia stared at Alexander, utterly speechless. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The scale of it. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply bought the building. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Leo. Mr. Dubois, flanked by two stern-looking security guards, approached Leo's table. The vlogger's camera was still rolling, catching the moment. Dubois leaned in and spoke in a low, urgent tone. The smug grin on Leo's face vanished, replaced by confusion, then indignation, then sheer, stark panic, as a leather-bound billfolder was placed firmly on the table in front of him. What is this? Leo's voice was loud enough to carry. This is a mistake. My expenses are covered. There is no mistake, Mr. Vance, Dubois said, his voice now devoid of any warmth. The hotel is under new ownership, effective 10 minutes ago, and the new owner wishes to settle accounts. The words hung in the air. New ownership. Whispers erupted around the room. Who? How Skylar's perfectly made-up face was a mask of confusion. Her camera, still live-streaming, caught Leo's face, turning a blotchy red as he opened the bill. The amount was astronomical. This is ridiculous, he sputtered, looking wildly around the room. His eyes fell on the terrace doors where Sophia and Alexander were just stepping back inside. He saw the way Dubois kept glancing nervously in their direction. He saw the way the most powerful people in the room were now looking not at him but at Sophia's quiet, unassuming date. And in one horrifying, gut-wrenching moment of clarity, Leo Vance understood exactly what had just happened. The man he had dismissed as a +1 had just bought the entire goddamn hotel to settle a score. Skylar's livestream captured it all, Leo's face crumpling in humiliation. The frantic whispers, the collective turning of backs as the initial social hierarchy of the room seismically realigned in real time. The spotlight that had so recently bathed him in glory now felt like an interrogation lamp exposing him for what he was, a small, loud man who had picked a fight with a giant. His influence, his prestige, his entire curated brand, it all evaporated in the face of one quiet, devastating transaction. The car ride away from the Serafina was silent, but it was a comfortable, contemplative silence. The city lights streaked past the window, a blur of gold and white. Sophia was still trying to process the tectonic shift she had just witnessed. It wasn't just about the money or the power or the spectacular downfall of her ex-husband. It was the way Alexander had done it. It was a checkmate delivered with the quiet precision of a grandmaster, not the boorish gloating of a street brawler. Are you okay? Alexander asked finally, his voice cutting gently through her thoughts. She turned to look at him. In the dim light of the car, he was just the man from the coffee shop again. Thoughtful, kind. I think so, she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. I've never seen anything like that in my life. He was disrespectful to you, Alexander stated simply, as if that explained everything. I have a low tolerance for bullies. You bought a hotel, Alexander. The words sounded absurd and wonderful at the same time. He gave a slight shrug, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. It was a sound investment. The property was undervalued, and the general manager clearly needed a lesson in priorities. He paused, his expression turning serious. But that's not what matters. What matters is that you never have to feel diminished by him again. His chapter is closed. And in that moment, Sophia knew it was true. The lingering hurt, the sting of his public erasure of her, it was gone. It hadn't been purged by revenge, but by the overwhelming evidence that she had moved on to something so much more real and substantial. Leo's world was a flimsy stage set. Alexander's was the bedrock beneath it. Her victory wasn't in Leo's defeat. Her victory was sitting right next to her. Meanwhile, the digital world was exploding. Skylar, in a moment of panic and flawed judgment, had kept the live stream going far too long. Millions of her followers had watched in real time the exact moment her fairy tale evening imploded. They saw the bill. They saw Leo's apoplectic, helpless face. They saw the pitying and scornful looks from the other guests. The clip was ripped, reposted, and went viral within the hour. The internet, once Leo and Skylar's kingdom, turned on them with merciless speed. The comments section of Skylar's page became a wasteland. OMG, he got owned by his ex-wife's new man. That look on his face when he realized the plus one was a billionaire. Sky is the limit, more like debt has no limit, LMAO. All that talk about being a visionary, and he couldn't even see who was standing right in front of him. This is the best thing I've ever seen. The way the new owner bought the whole hotel just to shut him up. Savage. Quiet savage. The hashtag Serafina Showdown trended worldwide. Memes were born. Leo's face of horrified realization was photoshopped onto everything, from crying cat pictures to stock market crash charts. Skylar's brand of manufactured perfection was shattered by a single brutal dose of reality. Her followers, who had bought into a fantasy, felt cheated. Their adoration curdled into ridicule. The next morning, the consequences bled from the digital world into the real one. The Vance lifestyle brand, which was built entirely on the perception of influence and success, began to crumble. A major athletic wear company that had just signed a seven-figure endorsement deal with Leo and Skylar called to indefinitely postpone the campaign launch. An investor in Leo's latest venture, a high-end men's grooming line, pulled his funding citing concerns about brand integrity. Leo's power had been an illusion, and Alexander had ripped the curtain away for the whole world to see. Sophia woke up to a flood of texts from Maya, mostly just keyboard smashes and links to Twitter threads. She read a few, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. There was no glee, no triumphant fist-pumping. There was only quiet. The noise that had surrounded Leo for years, the noise he had used to drown her out, had finally been silenced. Later that afternoon, her phone rang. It was Alexander. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice warm. "I've just acquired a first edition of Dante's Inferno with original Gustave Doré engravings. It's magnificent, but it has some slight water damage on the cover. It needs an expert, and I was hoping that expert might also be free for dinner tonight." Sophia smiled a real unburdened smile. She looked around her quiet apartment at the books, waiting patiently for her care at the life she had painstakingly rebuilt for herself. It was a good life, a substantive life. "I think," she said, her heart feeling light and full, "I can fit that into my schedule." Her new chapter wasn't about the downfall of her ex-husband or the wealth of her new companion. It was about her passion, her strength, her quiet victory. It was about a woman who had learned to find value, not in the noise of public approval, but in the beautiful, resilient substance of her own story. Weeks turned into a month. The digital shockwave of the Serafina Showdown had lasting repercussions. Skylar Monroe attempted a clumsy pivot. She posted a tearful black and white video titled "My Truth," where she spoke about the pressures of living a public life and the pain of seeing her relationship scrutinized. It was a valiant effort to reclaim the narrative, but her audience, now cynical, saw it as just another performance. Her engagement plummeted, and lucrative brand deals dried up, replaced by offers from detox teas and mobile games. Her relationship with Leo, built on the unstable ground of mutual brand enhancement, began to fracture under the weight of their shared public humiliation. Their once perfect Instagram feed became sporadic and strained. Leo Vance simply disappeared. He deactivated his social media, and the Vance lifestyle brand website was replaced with a simple under construction page. Rumors swirled that he was facing lawsuits from disgruntled investors and had sold his flashy downtown condo at a loss. He had built his identity on a pedestal of perceived success, and when it was kicked out from under him, he had nothing left to stand on. Sophia, by contrast, had never been more visible, yet she remained firmly out of the spotlight. Stories had run in business journals and high society pages about the mystery woman who captivated tech mogul Alexander Sterling. But she declined all interview requests. Her anonymity was her own, and she guarded it. Her business, however, flourished in the most unexpected way. A curator from the prestigious Morgan Library and Museum, who had been at the gala and was impressed by the quiet dignity with which she had handled the confrontation, reached out. He hadn't known about her connection to Alexander at the time. He had simply been told by a mutual acquaintance that she was the best rare book restorer in the field. He commissioned her for a major project, the restoration of a collection of hand-illustrated medieval manuscripts. It was the project of a lifetime work that demanded all her skill, passion, and expertise. Her success wasn't a byproduct of Alexander's wealth. It was the direct result of her own talent, a talent that was finally being recognized on its own merits. Her relationship with Alexander deepened far from the glare of paparazzi and the opulence of galas. They spent weekends at his understated country estate, not hosting lavish parties, but taking long walks in the woods, reading by the fire, and engaging in hours-long conversations about everything from astrophysics to the history of papermaking. He was fascinated by her mind and her quiet strength. She was drawn to his powerful intellect and the profound kindness that underpinned his every action. He never treated her like a conquest or a trophy. He treated her like a partner. He would often sit in her workshop for hours, simply watching her work, content in the shared silence. He once told her, "My world is about building the future, Sophia. It's all code and projections. You keep the past alive. You remind me that some things are meant to last." One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 months after the gala, Sophia was walking through a park near her apartment. As she rounded a bend, she saw a solitary figure on a bench, staring blankly at the ducks on the pond. It was Leo. He looked diminished. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple jacket and jeans. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a weary slump. The charismatic energy had been extinguished, leaving behind a tired, defeated man. He didn't see her, and she had no desire to approach him. She didn't feel a surge of triumph. She didn't feel hatred or pity. She felt nothing at all. He was a stranger, a ghost from a story that was no longer hers to read. She simply continued her walk, the sun warm on her face, leaving him behind in the fading light. That evening, as she and Alexander were preparing a simple dinner together in her apartment kitchen, he handed her a small, beautifully wrapped box. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Inside was the 19th century copy of Moby Dick from the coffee shop. But it was different. He had had it professionally rebound in the softest midnight blue leather to match the dress she had worn to the gala. On the inside cover, in elegant gold leaf, was a small, embossed whale. "A reminder," he said softly, "of the day you shielded something of substance from a storm." Sophia traced the outline of the whale with her finger, her heart full to bursting. She looked at Alexander, at the genuine love and respect in his eyes, and she knew. True wealth wasn't owning a hotel. True power wasn't commanding a room. True happiness wasn't a hashtag. It was this: the quiet moments, the shared understanding, the profound, unshakable knowledge that she was valued not for who she was with, but for exactly who she was. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. Nearly a year had passed since the night of the Phoenix Ball. The seasons had turned, and with them, the narratives of all their lives had settled into new, more permanent forms. The Serafina Showdown was now a piece of internet law, a case study in branding classes on the perils of manufactured influence. For Sophia, however, it was a distant echo, a story about a woman she barely recognized anymore. Her life now was one of quiet rhythm and profound joy. The Morgan Library project had been a triumph, cementing her reputation as one of the preeminent restorers in her field. Her relationship with Alexander had blossomed into a true partnership, a seamless blend of their two worlds. They were the architect and the archivist, one building the future, the other preserving the past, finding their perfect equilibrium in the present. This particular Saturday found them at his country estate, a place of rugged stone-warm wood and vast windows that looked out onto rolling hills. It was a home, not a showpiece. Sophia was in the sun-drenched library, her fingers gently tracing the tooling on a 17th century atlas, while Alexander worked across from her, sketching on a large tablet. He wasn't designing a skyscraper or a new data center. He was designing a dream. "I have a question for you," he said, his stylus pausing mid-air. He turned the tablet towards her. On the screen was a breathtaking architectural rendering, a building of glass steel and reclaimed timber that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. It was modern, yet timeless. "This is the preliminary design for the Sterling Foundation's new central community hub. The city has already approved the land grant." "It's beautiful, Alexander," Sophia said, genuinely impressed. "It looks like a library, a museum, and a park all in one." "That's the idea," he confirmed. "But it's missing a heart, a soul. My board wants a standard digital resource center. Efficient, clean, sterile. I think that's a profound failure of imagination." He zoomed in on a large wing of the building. "This section here, I envision it as the living archive, a place dedicated not just to storing physical media books, manuscripts, photographs, films, but to celebrating them. A place with restoration labs visible to the public, workshops for bookbinding and calligraphy, soundproofed rooms for listening to vinyl records. A place that teaches new generations that our history is tangible, that you can hold it in your hands." He looked at her, his expression earnest. "It's a massive undertaking. It needs a director who doesn't just understand preservation, but who believes in it with their entire being. Someone with the vision to build the collection, design the exhibits, and lead the entire division. It needs you, Sophia." Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a casual offer or a pet project for the billionaire's girlfriend. This was a serious, demanding, public-facing role. It was everything she had once shied away from. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. To be a public figure, not for her association with a man, but for her own knowledge and passion. "Alexander, I'm a restorer. I work in quiet rooms on one page at a time," she said, the old hesitation, a faint whisper. "And now you can build the rooms," he countered gently. "You can inspire 1,000 others to care for those pages. This isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about building the lighthouse. Don't you see it's the culmination of everything you are?" He was right. It was the natural next step, the ultimate expression of her life's work. It was a chance to build something permanent. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Yes, I'll do it." The project, which they began calling The Hearth, moved quickly. As director of the archival wing, Sophia was tasked with acquiring foundational collections. She spent her days meeting with estate planners, collectors, and university librarians, building a library from the ground up. It was during this process that a ghost from her past reappeared, not with a bang, but with a quiet, desperate email. The email was sent to the Foundation's General Acquisitions address. It was from a private art consultant representing a Ms. S. Monroe, who was looking to sell a significant collection of 20th century fashion photography books, including several rare signed first editions by masters like Richard Avedon and Helmut Newton. Sophia stared at the name. S. Monroe. It could only be one person. A quick, discreet inquiry by Alexander's team confirmed it. After her public fall from grace and her breakup with Leo Schuyler Monroe had been forced to liquidate her assets, the photography collection was one of her last valuable possessions. "We don't have to pursue it," Alexander told her that evening, his hand covering hers. "There are other collections." Sophia thought for a long moment. She remembered the empty performative woman at the gala. She remembered the vicious online comments and the brutal collapse of a life lived on social media. There was no sense of triumph in it anymore, only a grim sadness. "No," she said finally. "The collection itself is world-class. If the provenance is clean and the price is fair, the hearth should have it. I'll handle the meeting myself." The meeting was set for the following week at a neutral art gallery downtown. Sophia chose her outfit with care, a simple, professional grey dress, her hair tied back. She was not Sophia Hayes, the ex-wife, or Sophia Alexander Sterling's partner. She was Ms. Hayes, the director of the archival wing. She arrived first and was examining a painting when Schuyler walked in. The change was jarring. The glamorous, over-the-top influencer was gone. In her place was a young woman who looked her age for the first time. Her hair was its natural color, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no discernible makeup, and her clothes a plain black turtleneck, and jeans were neat but unremarkable. The biggest change was in her eyes. The confident, challenging gaze was gone, replaced by a deep, weary anxiety. She didn't recognize Sophia at first. She approached nervously, looking for the foundation representative. "Ms. Monroe," Sophia said, turning to face her. Schuyler stopped dead, recognition, confusion, and a wave of pure horror washed over her face. She looked like she was about to bolt. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hello, Schuyler," Sophia said calmly, extending a hand. "I'm Sophia Hayes. I'm the director overseeing acquisitions for the project. Please, let's sit." They moved to a small seating area. Schuyler sank into a chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She wouldn't meet Sophia's eyes. I didn't know it was you," Schuyler stammered. "My consultant just said it was a new foundation. I can go." "That isn't necessary," Sophia said, her tone gentle but professional. "I'm here to evaluate the collection. That's all. Tell me about it. Why did you collect these specific photographers?" The question seemed to catch Schuyler off guard. She had likely expected scorn or pity or a gloating lecture. She hadn't expected a professional inquiry. She hesitated, then began to speak, her voice shaky at first. My grandfather was a photographer, not a famous one. He just shot for local papers. But he loved Avedon. He had a print of Dovima with elephants hanging in his darkroom. He taught me about lighting, about composition. He said a great photo doesn't just show you a person, it tells you their entire story in a single frame. As she spoke, a flicker of genuine passion ignited in her eyes. She talked about Newton's provocative power, about Penn's elegant simplicity. She wasn't reciting talking points. She knew her subject. This collection wasn't just an asset she'd been given. It was something she actually understood and loved. Sophia realized with a jolt that buried deep beneath the vapid influencer was a person with a genuine interest, a story of her own that had been papered over by hashtags and sponsorships. "And Leo," Sophia asked softly, the only time she would mention his name. Schuyler flinched, but she answered. "He thought it was a good investment, something to make me seem sophisticated. He never opened a single one." A bitter, sad smile touched her lips. "He's in Singapore now, trying to launch some crypto consulting thing. He emails sometimes. It's like he doesn't even remember what happened. He's already rewritten the story in his head." It was a pathetic, fitting epitaph for the man who had tried to rewrite Sophia's story. He was a ghost, haunting his own failed narrative on the other side of the world. Sophia made her decision. The collection is magnificent, Skylar. It would be an honor to have it at the hearth. We'll pay the full asking price from the valuation. Tears welled in Skylar's eyes. Why are you doing this? She whispered. After everything, I was awful to you. I'm doing this because the books deserve to be seen, Sophia said, her voice full of a grace she didn't know she possessed, and because my grandfather loved books too. She stood up, offering her hand again. Good luck with whatever you choose to do next, Skylar. Skylar shook her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Thank you, she said, and for the first time, it sounded real. Months later, the day of the groundbreaking ceremony for the hearth arrived. It was a bright, clear day. Sophia stood at a podium facing a crowd of city officials, donors, and community members. Alexander was in the front row, his eyes fixed on her, glowing with pride. She looked out at the crowd, unafraid. She was no longer a ghost at someone else's feast. This was her stage built on her terms. We stand here today at the beginning of a story, she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified in the open air. A story about building a bridge between the past and the future, between the silent wisdom held in the pages of a book and the infinite possibility of the digital frontier. In an age of fleeting images and disposable information, we are making a promise that our stories, our collective history, will not be erased, that they will have a home, a place of substance, a place to last. She finished her speech to thunderous applause. She walked down from the podium and took her place beside Alexander. Together they picked up 2 silver shovels and alongside the mayor plunged them into the rich, dark earth. As the cameras flashed, Sophia looked at Alexander, her partner, her friend, her love. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the quiet, rebuilding, the serendipitous meeting over a spilled coffee, the spectacular night that closed one chapter, and the beautiful, substantive life that had followed. She wasn't the woman who had been humiliated by her ex-husband anymore. She wasn't even the woman who had watched him fall. She was the woman who was now building a legacy, spadeful by spadeful, right here in the light. So what's the real takeaway from Sophia's incredible story? It's a powerful reminder that in a world that shouts true strength, often whispers. While her ex-husband chased the hollow echo of social media fame, Sophia quietly invested in herself, in her passion, and in her own worth. His empire was built on sand, ready to be washed away by the first tide of public opinion. Her foundation was built on the bedrock of authenticity and skill. The dramatic climax at the gala wasn't just about an ex-husband getting his comeuppance. It was about the universe spectacularly realigning to reward substance over surface. It proves that the most powerful currency isn't followers or fame, but self-respect.